Welcome to the Leaderish podcast with your hosts, Regina and Doris. Hey, Doris. How's it going?
Hey, Regina. It's going very well. I'm so excited about our topic today, communication, one of my favorite subjects. Thank you so much for picking this topic today.
I mean, this is where you shine, Doris.
I love it. I love it. So what are we going to talk about?
Well, I have been reading Jefferson Fisher's book, and it's Jefferson, not Jeff, as Mel Robbins has pointed out to us, because, you know, she's our bestie. Jefferson Fisher wrote a book called The Next Conversation, and I'm reading it. Now, you know I don't read a lot of business books. You
Am
know
I
this about
inspiring
me.
you to read more business books?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think you are. I got to keep up with you. Somehow, you always bring these amazing nuggets to the podcast with these great books. So I'm just happy that I can contribute in a meaningful way with some really great content today. And I'm doing that through Jefferson Fisher and the book, The Next Conversation. I listen to books, as you know. I don't always read paperback books or hardback books. I like to listen because I like to clean the house or do whatever while I'm listening to my books. And I have been engrossed in this book, The Next Conversation. And here's why. Because Jefferson isn't all about winning the conversation or winning the argument. He's about creating and maintaining connection with the person that you're communicating with. Now, this works when you're upset and you're talking to a spouse or a sibling or a parent or a child or a coworker. But it also works in just everyday conversation so that you are confident and assured in what you're saying every day.
Yeah, and I haven't read that book. It's on the list. I think I'm reading Atomic Habits now is the one I'm working on. But I did listen to the podcast with Mel Robbins. And what's interesting about Jefferson is that he is a trial attorney. So you'd think that he'd be all about winning the argument. And yet he learned in all the work that he does, it's not about winning the argument. It's about the influence and being effective when you are having that conversation. And I think he gives some really good tips and tricks. And I know you and I have experienced some of these things, and some of these things we've talked about before, and it's worth repeating, as we will very likely do today.
Yeah. So I kind of created a little list of some of the things that he talks about that really impacted me. So I'll just go through those and then we'll start at the top. The first one is the myth of winning the conversation. So we just kind of started on that. We'll continue that conversation a little bit more. The power of the pause, which you are
my
awesome
favorite
at. I know. The role of curiosity to keep an open dialogue. We'll also talk about boundaries and tone management, which is probably my biggest struggle when I'm angry. We'll talk about clear and concise language, which is also your heavy hitter. So we'll dive deep with you there as well. So those are kind of the pieces that I picked out for us to discuss today. And I'd love to start with that myth of winning an argument. I even wrote a post about this or an article last week. You can find that on Collective Growth CC.
It was a great article. I loved it.
Well, thank you. And it really came from the heart because as I'm reading Jefferson's book, listening to Jefferson's book, what I realized is that I have had many conversations in my past where my goal was to win. I wanted to come out ahead. And when I thought back to those conversations that I actually won, what I realized is that I lost. I lost a lot. And the one thing that was most impactful is that I lost trust with the person that I was communicating with.
And that's the most important thing you want to have in a relationship is trust. And it's so easy. It takes a long time to build trust. It can take seconds to destroy that trust. And you can do that when you are upset, when you try to win that argument. Can you share a little bit more detail on that conversation that you wrote about in that blog? I know it was a very specific conversation.
Yeah, and I remember this like it was yesterday. This was several years ago, but that is how much it impacted me. And I was very concerned with how me and a peer were working together, with the level of output that the peer had displayed for the team. Actually, I think I was a level higher, but the person didn't actually report to me directly. They reported to someone else, but we worked together quite often. And
so this was a project you were working on together.
Well, we worked on lots of things together. So this was a culmination of a lot of projects and a lot of conversations that didn't happen. And one day, this person had kind of snapped at me, and I just stopped and I said, we need to talk about this. We got to figure out what's going on. And actually, I went into the conversation with the best of intentions. And there was one thing that the person said that triggered me and got me really defensive. And that's when I snapped back with some mean and hurtful things, with some stories that I had created in my mind that were based on a few facts, but not all of the facts. And what happened is we both actually ended up crying in this meeting. Not kidding. We both said mean and hurtful things. And we were both very disappointed by how the other person worked and shared their work. I thought that everyone should work my way. The person thought that everyone should work their way. And it created a lot of emotion in the room.
Wow.
We did get to an okay spot though, Doris. However, the next day, I felt like I really needed to go and apologize for some of the things that I said where I didn't have full context. And I just blurted them out to be hurtful, not to be helpful.
Yeah. Did it help?
And it did. But to your point, it took a long time to rebuild that trust. That apology did not rebuild that trust. It took many months, actually probably 2 years, for that trust to actually be rebuilt.
And that's what happens with those conversations. And I'm so glad that you had that experience because you're able to talk about it today. You learned from that conversation, and you knew if you had to do it over again, I'm sure that things would be very different. You would say things very differently. And if you had a conversation today, or as you're teaching your children how to have a conversation, you can bring what you learned way back then into that teaching moment today. And that's what's so important.
Yeah. And I'm going to skip to the role of curiosity really quick because I think that feeds into this myth of winning the conversation. And it goes really well with this story because what happened in that conversation is that I lost my ability to be curious. I focused on winning the argument and I lost my ability to be curious. So I took those few pieces of information, the few facts, I stitched them together to a story, lost all my curiosity, did not ask questions, did not dive into what was really happening in this person's life and at work. And because I did that, I created stories without context.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we see a lot of that happening on social media today, or you hear little bits and pieces from one news channel or another news channel, and you try to piece things together yourself and you make up stories, or you start saying things yourself and I know, I'm sure you've never done this, but you see things on social media where you sometimes just shake your head, and the term fake news comes to mind, where people wind up coming up with their own ideas because of the little bits and pieces that they hear, whether it's from a friend or from a news outlet or from wherever, from another social media post. And you wind up not having the whole story, the whole picture. And absolutely, this is where curiosity comes in. And it's the number one rule as a coach is be curious.
That's right.
And ask lots of questions. And if you don't get the answer, if you still don't understand the answer, or you still don't have the picture, it's always a good idea to say, tell me more, or tell me more about that. Or can you dig a little deeper? Can you tell me a little bit more of where you're coming from as you're explaining this to me? and keep digging and digging and digging until you understand that full picture, and you have everything in your mind, or you can work, or you have together, you have everything. If you're having a conversation with one person and you're constantly not digging to try to, digging sometimes sounds like a very pejorative term, but we're digging out of curiosity. We want to learn more so that we can have a better relationship and a better conversation and a better way to build trust. Because I also think that asking curious questions can help build back that trust that perhaps you lost. And maybe if you'd gone in and, in addition to the apology, asked some of those curious questions, maybe, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't have taken 2 years to rebuild that relationship. That's hard to say.
Yeah, it is hard to say, but you bring up a really good point. What I had missed was all that context, and I never asked the question to get the context. Mm-hmm. Now, it did come out in the conversation. However, I should have been open to that. I should have wanted to have a dialogue, not to win. I should have had a desire to ease the tension and seek to understand instead of defend.
Yeah. And sometimes that's hard to do when you're being attacked. It goes back to the conversation we had 2 weeks ago about the let them theory. When you're being attacked, you want to attack back.
Fight or flight, lady.
Yes, fight or flight. And rather than fighting back, take that pause. Ask those questions. Be curious. Maybe let them attack you, and don't immediately attack back, because the let me part of that philosophy is, all right, I'm going to now pause. We haven't even talked about the pause yet, but I'm going to pause, sit back, and ask those curious questions so I can learn more and have an intelligent conversation and try to, if trust was broken, try to bring that trust back together again.
Well, that's the perfect segue into the pause, right? Because the pause creates the space for intention instead of reaction. So going back to the let them, how are you going to respond in this situation? You have to pause for a moment to let your brain process that. Because, by the way, when you're in fight or flight mode, your amygdala has hijacked your prefrontal cortex where your executive functioning lives. And your prefrontal cortex is going to help you navigate that. But when your amygdala is hijacking it, it wants to beat the person up.
Yes, it does.
Either with words or with fists, whatever.
Whatever.
So you have to pause to re-engage that prefrontal cortex so that you can create the space for the intention and not that fight or flight reaction.
Yeah. Well, one of the bullets you wrote down is use silence as a tool. And that came right from Jefferson's book. And I think we are, as a human race, I think we're afraid of silence. You know, we talk about silence in so many different forms. We talk about it in meditation. We talk about it in not winning an argument. We talk about it in Toastmasters. Instead of using ums and ahs as fillers, we want silence. And silence can be very dramatic, but it can also be used to just step back and think. We don't have to fill every piece of silence with words or with even looks or tone or body language. We can use that silence as a tool to try to really understand what the situation is and then approach it in a meaningful, positive, and creative way.
You know, and you can even say something like, I need a moment to process that.
Yes.
To open up that space for silence so that someone doesn't try to fill it. Because one of the things Jefferson says is that silence is so powerful that the other person will fill it. So by letting them know you're using some silence to process, gives them permission to not fill the silence.
I love that. That is really good advice, to ask for permission from the other person to say, I need a moment here. And however you say that is going to be helpful. And hopefully that person will respect you enough that you can take that moment or two, and it might feel like a really long time. 60 seconds, 90 seconds of silence feels like a lifetime, but it's not. And it's exactly what we need in order to process in our brains and to get that amygdala under control and to be able to have a meaningful conversations and move that conversation forward in a positive way rather than an attacking negative way, which is what it probably would have done, or what happened in your situation is it went down a wrong path. And if you'd both been able to pause, it might not have.
My husband and I had a really big decision to make last week. And so I actually left the kids at home and I met him for dinner so he and I could talk about this decision. And we were both a little on the emotional side about this decision and what we're going to choose to do as a family. And he had stated a point that at first I felt a little hurt by, but I used this, I need a moment to process. And what I realized as I took that moment to process, his intention was not to hurt me. It was what I heard, but it was not what he said. And I was able, after I processed it and took that moment, instead of just attacking back because my amygdala got hijacked, instead of attacking back, I was able to say, here's what I heard. Is that what you meant? And he said, no, not at all. Here's what I meant. We were able to get past that without a full-blown hijack because I asked for some permission for silence so that I could think about what he said and then ask the next question, again going back to curiosity. Here's what I think I heard. Is that what you said? And he was able to say, not at all.
Yeah. Oh, what a great story. And I'm very proud of him for giving you that moment, that silence. That's a very respectful example of both of you handling this with the amount of respect that people should have, especially in a marriage.
Well, we're not always adults when it comes to being married, but boy, in this one, we sure did well.
Well, we won't.
I think if anyone's married, for all of you who are listening, if you are married or if you are in a relationship or have a partner, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, we just celebrated 29 years last week. And I sometimes feel like we've taken our relationship, we're truly best friends. And we can talk about anything, and most of our conversations can turn into sometimes they're very comical jokes or comical direction. And sometimes he'll say something and I will literally, you implied this, but I inferred this, and we'll kind of in a joking way so that we understand and then we'll go in the right direction. But it's usually something that's more on the humorous side rather than something that's on the serious side.
That's really cute. I love it. I love it. Well, that kind of takes us into boundaries and tone management. This is where when I went through the intro, I said this is probably where I struggle the most. I can have a really mean, really direct tone. I don't know where it came from. I don't hear my mom doing this. I don't hear my dad doing this. I don't think it's a childhood thing. I think it was a coping mechanism at some point in my life. But I can get a tone that no matter the words coming out, the tone is harsh.
I can too, and I know exactly where I got it from.
I'm not sure where I got it from, but I think that the takeaway here is that you can be both kind and clear. We often can't actually hear ourselves. I know that for both you and me, when we started the podcast, we came in on different times, but when we first heard our own voice, we were like, that's what I sound like? And then
we got the sexy podcast microphones, and now we sound just amazing.
We really do. We do. It's true. It's true. People tell me that they just love my voice. I'm like, really? Wow. I don't like it. But I do manage my tone really well in our podcast. I don't always do that in my personal life when I'm frustrated with the children, when I'm frustrated with my husband. I can get a very direct and harsh tone. And there are times where I've heard it in my head and gone, Regina, why are you speaking this way to the people that you love?
But if you can catch yourself, that's huge right there in and of itself. So many times people will have a tone. And I said, I know where I got it from. I got it from my dad. My dad had the shortest temper, and he did things that we can't even talk about. I can see the anger that comes up when that happens in me. I can see my dad, and I have to step back. Sometimes I can step back in just a few seconds. Sometimes it takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Sometimes someone else has to point it out, like, Doris, you need to calm down. And you can't always see yourself. But as we get older, we might get more wrinkles, but you know what else happens is we get wiser and we learn more about ourselves, and we learn how to step back, and we learn how to pause, and we learn those boundaries. All of it takes time, and sometimes decades of work, and sometimes it takes other people pointing it out to us for us to realize it. But once we get there, it's a lot easier to control that tone, control those thoughts, to approach things in a more positive way.
Yeah, I have a couple examples here where tone can set two totally different vibes, right? So I have two phrases. One of them is, I hear you and I see it differently. And so there is a way to say, oh, I hear you and I see it differently.
Oh, yeah.
And that is Mean Regina. She just came out. You just heard her. You might have had like a little tingle up your spine. And then there's Kind Regina, who says, I hear you and I see it a little differently. Same words.
Yeah. And
Tone
there's also
changes everything.
The tone and the body language.
Yeah.
The way that you said both of those, when you were the hurtful Regina, your face looked differently than the kind Regina, because it's true though. You had a smile on your face. You had, I hear you and I see it differently. A curious, the look, maybe that's the look was more of a curious look when you said, I see it differently versus I hear you and I see it differently. It's a very different, not only is it a different tone, it's I am attacking you. I'm getting ready to attack you. I have no curiosity in my facial expression, in my tone, in my question. There's no curiosity. It's attack mode. Yeah. And versus the curious mode.
Look, whenever you see the butt crack between my eyes, no, I don't do Botox, but that's why I get a butt crack in between my eyes. But when you see a butt crack in between my eyes, you know Mean Regina's coming out. And the fact that I have one almost permanently says that Mean Regina comes out a little too often. Just saying.
Not anymore.
No, she really doesn't come out very much at all anymore. As I've gotten older and wiser, I realize that's not the type of human that I wanted to be. Even though I didn't really know I was that human before, I can now see when it happens and I can stop it pretty quick.
Again, that's back to knowing yourself. And we've talked about assessments before, and you don't necessarily need to pay a lot of money for an assessment, but just understanding who you are, where you came from, and just pausing, going back to that pause and understanding yourself a little bit better so that you can approach with the right boundaries, with that right tone management. But it takes decades to do that. I don't think until my dad was probably in his 90s, I don't think that he ever realized the kind of person that he was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it happens. Mm-hmm. It happens. Hopefully at 48, I'm starting to understand a little bit better. A lot of work to get there.
That's all right.
Let's talk about our last point that we wanted to pull out of Jefferson's book, The Next Conversation. And that's really around the clear and concise language that we choose to use. Now, Jefferson says things like take adverbs out, take out filler words. Doris, you would be the first one to say, stop saying Regina, during the podcast, which I've gotten way better on because of you. Thank you. So
you're welcome.
Let's talk about some of those tips. What tips might you recommend for removing some of those filler words?
I love this. I love this tip. And it's so true. And if you read a lot, you will recognize when there are too many words. And you don't just have to read a book. You can read newspaper articles, magazine articles, and the better written text out there will have the fewest number of words. And yes, I was an English major, so I learned about taking out some of those extra words. And even ChatGPT does a pretty good job of making things a little bit more clear and concise. When people write, they tend to write the way they speak. And when we speak, we use way more words than we need to use. And not only the filler words, because there's certainly a lot of likes and rights and ums and ands and just and maybe and I think and honestly. For example, the word I think. If you're saying it, we know you're thinking it. You don't need to start a sentence with, I think this is how it should be. You don't need that. It's redundant. It's really redundant language. And so we need to be careful and try to speak a little bit. Well, first of all, try to write a little bit more concisely. And if you're able to write concisely, there's a good chance you'll be able to speak a little bit more concisely as well and leave out those filler words. And you will very quickly realize how powerful the right words are when you're not adding a bunch of filler words.
So, Doris, I'm going to give you a sentence or two. Will you tell me how to create more concision? It's my word. You're welcome. More concision in this. So here's my statement. I'm sorry to bug you, but I think if maybe we could move the timeline out 2 weeks or so, that might be helpful for our project.
I would shorten that up to perhaps, my calendar is getting pretty filled up. We need to move this to June X. Provide a date.
I like that. Much more clear and concise. Although one of the things I noticed is you said, my calendar is getting pretty filled up. You could even have more concision and say, again, my word, you could say, my calendar is filling up, period. Can we move this out 2 weeks? ? Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yep.
It's so interesting because we talk in a lot of adverbs. I purposely threw in the words I'm sorry because we also overuse I'm sorry, especially in work environments. I think I'm sorry should be held for things that are you are truly accountable for. You are not accountable for asking a question to your leader or your peer.
Great point.
Why are you apologizing?
I have started to ask, when people say they're sorry, I've started to ask, what are you sorry for? And that catches them off guard.
That's awesome. And thank you for pointing out asking a question, because this is something that I started working on years ago. So I have pretty much eliminated I'm sorry from my vocabulary unless I've done something wrong. So what I'll say is, you do not need to apologize to me, or please don't apologize to me. You have nothing to apologize for.
You know, where I hear it a lot is on the pickleball court. Every time someone messes up, they tend to say, I'm sorry. And there's some girlfriends and I that play where we don't actually do it, but we've started joking that every time you say, I'm sorry, you've got to take a shot. And it might be kind of hysterical if we actually did that. And the word actually, I need to stop using actually, because that's a terrible filler word right there. But if we did that, it would be a complete drunk fest, because we say, I'm sorry every time we make a tiny little mistake on the pickleball court.
You know, you should come up with another thing. Like, if you make a mistake on the pickleball court, you scream pickle or something. Even something just crazy weird. I don't know. It could be zebra. We have a zebra running around Murfreesboro right now. So, you know, why not? Mm-hmm. Something just random that's not, I'm sorry.
Something creative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. So much fun. But changing those patterns, they're hard. The only way you can do them is if you have awareness to where you are right now. If you don't have awareness that you're saying, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I was thinking that maybe if we could just move out the timeline by 2 weeks, it might be helpful for me and the team.
Yeah.
Like, that was a lot of words.
That was a lot of words.
My calendar is filling up. Can we push out 2 weeks?
Yep.
And really, how are you even figuring out what they're trying to say? Okay. Well, clear and concise language, hard to do if you don't have the self-awareness with how you communicate. Try to record yourself. Record yourself on a conference call or even a phone call with a friend or a family member, or while you're having a conversation with your significant other, and just check for those filler words. Check for where you could have inserted additional concision into the conversation. I love it how you laugh every time.
Join Toastmasters. They'll count all your ums and ahs and filler words.
That's right. That's right. They will. So find a Toastmasters group. They're all over the United States, and they meet at all different times and all different days. You can certainly find one that will work for you. All right. Well, we have had a pretty intense conversation about Jefferson Fisher's book, The Next Conversation, some of the things that I learned from it, and thank you for sharing all of your experience with effective communication.
Too. Thank you for getting vulnerable and sharing that conversation you had so many years ago.
You bet. Well, as just kind of a quick wrap up, I would recommend that you stop trying to win your conversations. Go out there and try to connect with others as you're having conversations. There's no need to win them all. In fact, every time you win, you lose. Pause. Use the power of the pause, regain control in that conversation. Make sure you're staying curious and you're trying to dig deeper for that context in a caring, kind, and loving way. Be intentional about your tone. Do not be mean, Regina. She's no fun.
Or mean, Doris.
Or mean Doris. No, don't be mean, Doris. Mm-hmm. And then make sure you're speaking simply and clearly. You're using concise language. You're removing those filler words. Doris, what do you think our listeners should do this week as they have finished listening to this episode?
I think you said you used the word several times, and I think it's worth repeating. Oh, I said I think. Bad Doris.
Was it concision? Is that the word?
But rewind. You used the word several times. It is worth repeating, and that is self-awareness. To me, that's the most important word that we've used on the podcast today, is that self-awareness and understanding where we are in each one of these points. Do we always try to win those arguments? Do we fill that silence? Are we curious enough? All those points, let's reflect back and listen to, as you're listening to the podcast, maybe listen to it again, go through it again, the different points that we talked about. Do you see yourself as a listener? Do you see yourself maybe not doing some of these points as well as you could? And you might need to ask someone else. You might need to write these down and ask your peer, your coworker, your spouse, maybe even your child. And I say maybe even too often. That concision. So I'm trying to
concision.
But having that self-awareness, and then once you have that self-awareness, going back through these points and trying to improve on every one of them.
I love it. Thank you, Doris. That is a great idea. Build that self-awareness, re-listen, and then go through each of those points and see where you can develop. All right. Well, folks, that is about it for our episode today. We'd love to talk to you. Send us a message on what you're working on. We'll help hold you accountable. You can email us at leaderishpodcast@gmail.com. You can catch us on Instagram. We don't have Facebook anymore. Or you can just email us directly. We'd love to chat with you. You can find all of our links in the show notes if you want to reach out directly, and follow us on this journey as we delve into all things leadership. We'd also love a review. So if you have a few minutes and can give us a 5-star review, and bonus points if you add a comment in. We would be forever grateful. We do read them. We love them. I know that on Apple Podcasts, you can leave a comment. I don't think that you can on Spotify, and you have to listen to several episodes before you can rate us on Spotify as well. So wherever you listen to your podcast, do whatever you can to help us. And if you're interested in being a guest, reach out. If you have an engaging topic, we'd love to talk to you about that. We love having guests on. We do vet our guests a lot, though. We like to have people that we really connect with. If you want to connect with us, we want to connect with you and get to know you a little bit better and invite you on the podcast. All right, well, Doris, that's about it for today. So I'll end us with a cheers.
Cheers.